Wow. Well, good morning, everybody. And thank you, Tony, for that very, very kind introduction. As the expression goes, my father would have enjoyed that, and my mother would have believed it. Well, I'm absolutely thrilled to be here with you this morning, especially at this conference because of who you are, what you represent, and also to be involved with Tony and Chet and all of you that have come together to make this great. I really am honored because of the nature of the leaders in this room. So it's a thrill to me to talk to you about this topic that I think is so vital and becoming more vital than ever before. Let me begin, if I could, with a story. This happened a couple of years ago, an experience I had where I went fly fishing up in Montana. Have any of you been fly fishing before? Say, quite a few of you. It's a great activity. This is catch and release. I hired a guide to teach me how to do this. It was a beautiful summer day. We went into this river in Montana, and we got into the water, and the guide asked me this question. He said, "What do you see?" And I looked around, and I said, "Well, I see the river and the bank and the rocks on the side." And he goes, No. Look into the water. What do you see in the water? So I looked into the water, and I couldn't see anything because the glare of the sun was beating down and caused it so that I couldn't see through the water. And I said, "Well, I can't see anything." And he said, "Well, I can." Now, he had these polarized sunglasses on, so he had a little advantage. And he said, "I can see, and you know what? There are fish all around you. In fact, there's some right there. You can't see them?" I said, "No, I can't." He said, "Here, don't take my word for it. Take these glasses." So he handed me these pair of polarized sunglasses. I put them on. The moment I put on the glasses, instantly I could see through the water. And sure enough, just like he said, there were fish everywhere, all around me. Now, what was interesting was this. The fish were there all along. I just couldn't see them until I put on the glasses. But the fact that I couldn't see them didn't mean that they weren't there. They were there. It just took putting on the glasses for me to appreciate, to recognize, and to see what was really there. So it is with trust. The effect of trust, the relevance of trust, the impact of trust, the pervasiveness of trust is there, whether we can see it or not. And many times we don't see it until it's gone. But the fact that we don't see it doesn't mean that it's not there. It is there. So what I hope to do today is to give you a pair of trust glasses, metaphorically speaking, that enable you to see this topic with new eyes, see it differently, see it for what it really is. I also want to give you some trust tools so that you can do something about this. You can learn, you not only can see it differently, you can act on it differently, behave on it differently, and get better results. So I want to give you glasses and some tools. Now, see, trust is a topic that we all of us know about it. We assume it. We take it for granted. We ignore it. We neglect it until we lose it. And then we become painfully aware of it, but sometimes too late. And I don't want us to do that. I want to take this topic head on and to recognize how vital this is to all of us. Now, let me go into this idea. When I tell people I'm going to talk about trust, here's the first thought that comes to many of them. Kind of like, oh, how sweet, how nice. We're going to talk about trust, and then we'll get around the campfire, and we'll roast marshmallows and sing Kumbaya. Because the perception is that it's a good thing, a positive thing, a nice thing, a social thing. But there's not enough understanding that this is, in fact, a hard-edged, tangible, economic driver, which I'm going to talk about it in that way. See, there's a French proverb that says, "Fish discover water last." See, the fish are so immersed in the water, they're unaware of its existence until the water gets polluted or becomes too low. So it is with people and trust. People discover trust last. We're so immersed in it. It's so much the basis on which our society works, our markets work, relationships work, that we assume it, we take it for granted until it gets too low or becomes polluted. And then we become very aware of it, painfully aware. So rather than take it that way, let's put on these new glasses and see this differently. So I'm going to go through a few of the myths about trust and give you the reality, the new pair of glasses to see this differently. Because when we see it differently, we'll act on it differently. Here's one of the myths that's common. The whole idea that trust is merely a soft, nice-to-have social virtue. The reality is this: trust is a hard-edged economic driver. Economic, not just social. Similarly, another myth related to the first, that trust is slow, that it takes forever. Now, I acknowledge that restoring trust will take time, and it can take time to establish trust. However, once you understand the nature of trust and the dimensions behind it, and especially the behaviors that build it, I maintain that you can establish trust far faster than you might think possible. And this I know for sure. Once you've established trust, once you have trust, nothing is as fast as the speed of trust. See, once you have trust, you move at an incredible speed that you can't come close to approximating without it. Now let me dive deeper into this. In fact, let me share with you the 3 big ideas that I want to get across this morning. That I hope that you'll walk away when you finish this presentation, you'll remember these 3 things. Then I'll briefly mention each one, and then I'll go through each 3 in greater depth. The first big idea is this: trust is financial, not just social. Let me repeat that. Trust is financial, not just social. In other words, there's a compelling business case for trust. The second big idea is this: trust is the new currency of the new global economy. Trust is a new currency of this global economy that's needed today more than ever before. The third big idea is this: trust is a learnable competency. It's a skill. It's something we can actually improve at, get better at, learn how to do, increase and grow. And too many people have operated from the opposite assumption that trust is something you either have or you don't, that it's either there or it's not there. That might be your starting place, but the reality is trust is something we can learn and do and get good at. And I'm going to show you how today. So those 3 big ideas: trust is financial, not just social. Trust is the new currency of this new economy, and that trust is a learnable competency. So going into this first idea, that this is financial, not just social. See, these common myths are that it's just social. The reality, it is financial. It's about speed. It's about reducing costs. Let me illustrate. A couple of years ago, there was a merger that took place. Warren Buffett, you all know Warren Buffett, world's greatest investor. They say if you would have invested $1 in his company, Berkshire Hathaway, that dollar would be worth almost more than any other investment you might have made over an extended period of time. Great track record. You look at his results, they're extraordinary over an extended period of time. He also has a great brand, a reputation. He's known for being credible, for being highly trusted. Second wealthiest person in the world. I don't know how long he'll remain there. He just donated recently $30 billion to the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation for the eradication of diseases around the world. So Warren Buffett, he goes in and he's acquiring a company from Walmart called McLean Distribution. McLean is in food services. They're big, $23 billion in revenue. So this is not a little deal. This is a big deal taking place. Here's how Buffett described doing this deal. He wrote about it in his annual report as follows. He said, to make the McLean deal, we had one single meeting of about 2 hours. We then shook hands. 29 days later, Walmart had their money. We did no due diligence. We knew everything would be exactly the way that they said it would be, and it was. So here's this big deal of these public companies happening in 29 days with no due diligence. Now, I used to work for a short period of time in investment banking many years ago. Don't hold that against me today. But many years ago, and I can tell you this, that deals of this size would typically take you 6 months to close, maybe even a year. And you'd typically spend millions of dollars in due diligence with accountants, attorneys, auditors, bankers, etc., verifying and validating the data. And all of that is considered good practice, and it generally is. But in this case, because there was high trust, because Buffett was so credible, so trusted, and he extended that trust to his new partners, he's able to go in and with that trusted relationship, do a deal in less than 1 month instead of 6 months to a year, and with no due diligence cost instead of spending millions in due diligence. Now that is what I mean by the speed of trust. You can't do that kind of deal without trust, or it'd be foolish to try. But with trust, it becomes a possibility. Nothing is as fast as the speed of trust. Let me tell you part 2 of this story. I shared this one time with a group of leaders. And afterwards, someone came up to me and said, so Warren Buffett acquired McLean in only 29 days with no due diligence. I said, that's right. He said, well, let me tell you my story. My company also was acquired by Warren Buffett. I said, really? Tell me more. He said, aha. He did our deal in 28 days. He was thrilled to point out it was 1 day faster. I said, really? Tell me more. He said, it was remarkable. He said, Buffett met with them. It was the first time they were meeting in person. He'd already assessed the business. And he asked them a couple of questions. This is what this CEO reported to me. He said, Buffett asked him, are these financials accurate? Yes, they are. Can I trust them? Yes, you can. Can I trust you? Yes, you can. You see, if we can trust each other, everything can work. If we can't, let's not do a deal, no matter how good it looks on paper. Can I trust you? Yes, you can. They shook hands. 28 days later, the deal is done. No due diligence. The speed of trust. Nothing is as fast as the speed of trust. Now, I like to give this story of Warren Buffett because his track record is so strong, so credible. He's all about results. And yet one of his key philosophies is this whole idea of deserved trust. It's the operating philosophy of Berkshire Hathaway, that they start on the premise that you deserve trust until you prove otherwise. And as a result, they get rid of what they call the craziness of people checking people, checking people, checking people, checking people. And they move at an extraordinary speed, low cost, high efficiency. Now, Buffett is so respected in business that, again, he takes this idea of trust and gives it a harder edge. It is a way of doing business that creates enormous value because of the increased speed and the lower cost. And that is economic. That is financial. And you can measure it. Let me tell you a couple more myths that are common that get in the way. Here's one. Trusting people is too risky. There's some truth to this, like there is in most myths. There is risk in trusting people. I'll acknowledge that. But we also need to be aware of this reality, that not trusting people is often the greater risk. Yeah, there's a risk in trusting, and there's a risk of not trusting. Just compare in a relationship, on a team, in a culture, in a company, with a partner, with a customer. When there's distrust, what happens? How redundancy gets built into the system because people don't trust each other. And then bureaucracy with excessive rules and regulations, policies and procedures because there's distrust. And then politics enter into the culture and everything slows down. And then you see people becoming disengaged because of this bureaucracy and they're not trusted. People want to be trusted when they're not. It disengages them. Then you see the turnover of people, especially the top performers, because they want to be trusted and they'll go to a place where they are trusted. You also see the turnover of customers and suppliers and distributors and other stakeholders, investors, because again, they also want trust, and without it, they go elsewhere. Finally, you'll even see fraud and the like because of distrust. So yeah, there's a cost in trusting, there's a risk in trusting, there's a risk in not trusting. We've got to learn to be smart about this. And to balance this out, what I call smart trust, the whole idea of trust and verify. But you lead out first with trust. You add to it the verification. That sequence seems vital. So I'm not advocating a blind trust where you just indiscriminately go out and trust anybody and everybody. That's not very smart, especially in today's world. I'm not advocating that. That's being gullible, a blind trust. But I'm also not advocating that we swing the pendulum the other way, completely, where because you've been burned or disappointed before in trusting someone, that you now no longer trust anybody. And I've seen many managers do that. They say, hey, you can't trust anyone but yourself, especially sometimes many entrepreneurs. You can only trust yourself. Well, there's maybe in some ways less risk to that, but in other ways there's more risk because of all the implications of that, all the consequences of that follow when there's distrust. So we've got to learn to find this happy balance, this third alternative, smart trust. Trust and verify. It's neither extreme, neither the blind trust nor the distrust. It's the third alternative, smart trust. Finally, let me mention another myth that's pretty pervasive, and that's the whole idea that you can't teach trust. That this is something that you either have or that you don't have. It's either there or it's not there. Common perceptions. I was with a Fortune 500 company recently, and they got this feedback where they measured trust within their organization. And the CEO looked at this, and the data showed that the trust was very low up and down the organization. And his reaction was this. He said, that's disappointing because we can't do anything about this. You either have trust or you don't. We don't have it, nothing we can do about it. And I said, I disagree with that. Actually, you can do a whole lot about this. In the same way trust can be destroyed, it can be grown, it can be built, it can be created, established, it can be extended, it can be restored. And you can get good at this, and we'll show you how. The reality is that you can teach this. You can learn this. You can apply this. You can understand this. You can deconstruct it and then reconstruct it. You can actually turn it into your greatest strength and competency as a leader, and that of your company. The ability to engender trust, to create trust, to extend it, and where needed, to restore it with all your different stakeholders. And doing that pays enormous dividends, which we'll talk about in just a moment. Now, everything I'm talking about, I think you know from your own practice and experience. So I want to tap into that. I want to do a brief exercise with you, if you would. If you take out a piece of paper, I would like each of you to identify a person that you work with and need to work with whom you have a high trust relationship. Okay, so identify someone that you work with whom there's high trust. This could be a direct report. This could be a board member. This could be a supplier, or could be a partner, could be a customer. But someone that you work with and need to work with and with whom there's high trust. Go ahead and write their name down, put their initials down, somehow identify them. Now, with that person in mind, let me ask you a couple of questions. And if you would just write down the first thoughts that come to you, 1 and 2 word type answers, first impressions. What is it like to work with this person with whom there's high trust? What's it like to work with them? Go ahead and jot it down. What's it like to communicate with them? How fast can you get things done? And what kind of results are you able to achieve together? All right? Now, this time I'd like you to identify a second person. This time it's someone that you work with and need to work with, but with whom you have, for whatever reason, a low trust relationship. So you need to work together, but the trust is low, or at least not where it needs to be or should be or could be. Again, it could be a direct report, could be a board member, colleague, peer, could be a customer, partner, supplier. If you need to work together, trust is low. Go ahead and somehow identify a person. Now let me ask you the same questions. And if you would just write down your first thoughts that come to you. What is it like to work with this person with whom there's low trust? Go ahead and jot it down. What's it like to communicate with them? How long does it take to get things done? And what kind of results are you able to achieve? So let me ask you this question. Is the difference in this relationship, is this a small incremental difference, or is this a huge difference? It is truly huge, isn't it? And literally everything is affected by it. Do you think if you wanted to, that you could put an economic price tag on the value of this difference? I think you can. I'll show you how in just a moment. I know you can put a qualitative price tag, but I think you can even put an economic price tag. And what's interesting is that we all know this. We've all been there. We're all experts on trust in one way or another, in that we've been in high trust relationships, we've been in low trust relationships, and the difference between the two is night and day. It is palpable, it is economic, and we know it. We've been there. And everything is affected by it. Let's just show how it's all affected by it. Let's take as an example communication. In a high trust relationship, high trust, what does the communication look like when there's high trust? It's easy, flowing, fast, open, fun, reassuring. It's authentic, loyal, confident. Exactly. See, it's all these things. It's authentic. It's real. What does it do to energy? It's energizing. What does it do to joy and satisfaction? It's pleasant. It's fun. It's engaging. You want to be a part of it. My experience is all of those things when there's high trust. But also this, in a high trust relationship, sometimes you can even say the wrong thing and people will still get your meaning. Right? You experience that? Trust fills in the gap. You misspoke, you miscommunicated, it's okay. Trust fills in the gap. They know your intent, your motive. Now let's contrast that to a low trust relationship. What does communication look like in a low trust relationship? Frustrating, high stress, slow, impossible, draining, shallow, assumptions. It's calculated, it's guarded, one-sided. People withhold information. They're calculating and guarding. They're cautious. You take very detailed notes and you document everything. You're not sure what their intent or motive is. What does it do to energy? It just sucks it out. It's draining. And to joy, it just takes that away too. It's stressful, it's painful, you avoid it. My experience is all of those things, but also this. In a low trust relationship, when there's low trust, you could be very measured and even precise in your communication, and people will still misinterpret you. See, read things into it, project their own agenda. Communication, you see, is far more a matter of trust than it is technique. And one reason why legal communication is so expensive and time-consuming in most cases is because it's based upon low trust. In some cases, no trust. As a result, it takes a lot of time, costs a lot of money. Now, I just went through communication. I could go through every dimension, every aspect of a relationship, of a team, of a culture, of a company, and you will find that they're all affected by trust. And the difference between high trust and low trust is night and day. It is palpable, it is qualitative, it is quantitative, economic, financial. Now, I told you the three big ideas. Trust is financial, trust is the currency of the new economy, and trust is a learnable competency. I'm taking these first two on in unison. Trust is financial. Let me start to approach the second one. Trust is a currency of this new economy. Think about it. Look at what's happening today. In fact, we're getting our case study on trust is taking place right now in front of our eyes, where you can see, markets that come to a standstill as trust leaves. When I was recently at this World Economic Forum, among all the participants, we surveyed, and people came up with the number one issue affecting growth and the economy over this next year. And it was not the financial crisis. That was the number two issue. The number one issue was the loss of trust and confidence that exasperates everything else, including the financial crisis. It's the number one issue. Trust is a currency in this new economy. And you see what happens when there's money. Governments come in and tell the banks, hey, we'll put more money in, and you try to get the capital in, you try to get the liquidity there, but if there's not trust it still doesn't work. It doesn't flow. If banks are afraid to lend money to other banks. They're not sure if the money's going to come back. So you can have money, you can have liquidity, but if you don't have trust, it doesn't work. It's trust that makes the markets work. It's trust that makes the world go around. You take it away, it grinds to a halt, slows down, evaporates. This is like a new currency, especially today. Now, I maintain this, that for all of us as leaders, that the ability to establish trust, to grow it, to extend it, and where needed to restore it with all of our stakeholders, and by stakeholders I mean with our customers and clients, with our business partners, suppliers, distributors, with our investors and sponsors, and with our coworkers, with our teams, with our colleagues. The ability to create trust with all these stakeholders is the number one competency of leadership needed today. Number one. That's a very bold claim to make. How can I make it? Let me tell you why. 3 reasons why this is so vital today. The first is, look at the nature of the world today. It's an interdependent world. It's being called the collaborative society, the collaborative economy. Everything is interdependent, connected. We're seeing it happen right now with this global financial crisis. It's connected. Everything is tied together. It's based upon relationships. It's based upon collaboration, based upon partnering. All those things, interdependence, collaboration, relationships, partnering, they die or they thrive based upon trust. Its absence or its presence. It's the very nature of our society today. Here's another reason why it's so vital. It's because there's so much noise and clutter out there. And there's going to continue to be more noise and more clutter, not less. So many sources, so many brands, so many people to look to. What does a consumer do? What do people do when there's so much noise and clutter? Who do they turn to? What happens is people turn to a source that they can trust, to a brand that they can trust, to a leader that they can trust, to a company that they can trust. And that trust cuts through all that noise and the clutter. And it's not going to go away. It will only multiply. Trust cuts through it. It's a huge advantage. That was the second reason. Here's the third reason why it's so vital. And that is because trust affects everything else. When you have high trust, it's like a performance multiplier that makes everything else that you do better. It's a rising tide that lifts all boats. And the data on this is overwhelming. Take some of the business issues of the day. Executing your strategy. Try to execute your strategy in a low trust environment, a low trust culture. You'll get slowed down and even derailed. Take the engagement of people. The Gallup data on this is overwhelming. 96% of engaged employees trust their leaders. Only 46% of disengaged employees trust their leaders. So which came first, the distrust or the disengagement? Yes, both. They feed upon each other. Disengaged people don't trust, and vice versa. Now, take collaboration and partnering. Studies show that they took a 10-year study from the Warwick Business School in the UK of outsourcing relationships over a 10-year period. And those that were based upon trust and relationship of trust, instead of based upon service level agreements in the contract, outperformed those by up to 40%. They called it the 40% trust dividend. You take innovation. Tony's been talking about innovation. The Financial Times took the top 20 innovators against the bottom 20 innovators in a study, and they found that the number one differentiating factor between the top 20 innovators and the bottom 20 innovators was high trust. See, innovation flourishes in a culture of high trust. In a low trust culture, people are afraid to make a mistake. They clamor for credit. They point the finger for blame. When high trust, you learn, you grow, you get developed, you share the credit. It's night and day difference. I'm just going through a few issues. The loyalty of customers. On this, it's overwhelming. You talk about those 3 ways to grow the business. Get more customers, get more transactions, get bigger dollar amount in the transactions. Well, guess what? The data on this is overwhelming. When you have high trust with customers, the customers will buy more from you. They'll refer more business to you, and you will get more customers. They'll be more loyal to you. They'll give you the benefit of the doubt. They'll buy more frequently, and they'll buy in larger amounts. Every measure moves up with trust. It's a rising tide. It truly lifts all boats. We could go on and on and on. In every dimension, every aspect, trust is a performance multiplier. Now, the opposite, low trust, is a destructive tax. It takes down, it causes you to lose the value of everything else that you have that's otherwise good. So why is this the number one skill to work on? It's because by getting good at this, it'll make you better at everything else that you need to do. When you're trusted as a leader, when your company is trusted as an enterprise, everything else that you do is viewed through that lens and seen and perceived differently than when you're not. When you're distrusted, for whatever reason, everything that you do is diluted, discounted, taxed. So this is vital because by getting good at this, it makes us better at everything else. Let me give you one last bonus reason why this is so vital. That's because we're operating increasingly in a low trust world, where the trust is going down all around us. We see it today in our society, maybe like never before. Now, if you, as a leader, as an entrepreneur, as an artist, whatever your role might be, if you have the ability to create trust in a world of declining trust, what an advantage that is to you. If your company has the ability to create trust in a world of declining trust, what an advantage to your organization. Now, this low trust environment is all around us. I'm going to go through some data. I'll go rather quickly through this data, just to lay the context for the environment in which we're operating. There's really a crisis of trust. It begins at the societal level. Low trust is everywhere in our society. Only 34% of Americans believe other people can be trusted. 1 in 3. Used to be much, much higher. In Great Britain, this number is 29%. In some parts of the world, it's as low as 6%, where basically people don't believe that they can trust anybody. There's other parts of the world in which it's much higher. But the point is, generally, it's low and going down, certainly in the US and in most societies, with some exceptions. The societal trust is going down. We're seeing it in our institutions. Trust in many institutions is sitting at historic lows. By institutions, I mean trust in media, trust in government, trust in political parties, trust in business, trust in education, trust in churches. Generally gone down. In some cases, it's never been lower than right now. And we're seeing that all throughout society. It's rare that you see what's happening right now, which is that you're seeing both trust in business going down, at the same time trust in government's going down, with some exceptions in different parts of the world. Let's take a look at our companies. Organizational trust is going down in most organizations. Less than half of employees trust their senior leaders. In the UK, it's 31%. It's a third. Meaning half of them don't. And they don't have that trust. You're seeing that only 36% of employees believe that their managers act with honesty and integrity. And 76% of employees have observed a high level of illegal or unethical conduct at work in the prior 12 months. When that conduct becomes exposed, you end up with a scandal. And then that causes the trust and confidence to erode even further, and we get caught in this vicious downward cycle of distrust and suspicion. We see it even at the individual level. This is the percentage of students who acknowledge that they cheated in order to improve their odds of getting into graduate school. 43% of liberal arts students. 52% of education students. 63% of law and medical students. And 75% of business students. Now, I was with a group of attorneys some time ago in Dallas, and these attorneys were thrilled to point out that they were not in last place. And they chided me because I had an MBA that I was in last place. Now, speaking of MBAs, look at this data. 76% were willing to understate expenses in order to not cut into company profits. And convicts, criminals in minimum security prisons scored higher on their ethical dilemma exam than did the MBAs. All of which makes you ask this question, who do you trust? I was with a group the other day, and I asked, who do you trust? And someone raised their hand and yelled out, convicts. See, who do you trust? See, let me define trust briefly if I could. By trust, I simply mean confidence. Confidence. The opposite of that, distrust, is suspicion. See, I don't trust someone if I'm suspicious about their agenda or their motive or their integrity, or if I'm suspicious about their capabilities or their track record. I do trust when I feel confidence. It's like Jack Welch said. He said, I could give you a dictionary definition of trust, but you know it when you feel it. And what you feel is confidence instead of suspicion. Such as a simple definition, confidence instead of suspicion. Now, here's why I shared all this data of low trust being all around us, because that's the environment in which we're operating. And here's the danger. We operate in this environment. We see scandals happen. We bounce back from it, but we bounce back just a little bit slower. We start to wonder, what else is out there? I wonder if that could be happening here. When's the other shoe going to drop? We become more guarded, more suspicious naturally, because we've got to protect ourselves. But what happens is we tend to find ourselves in that type of mode, where we, as our operating premise, lead out with distrust to protect ourselves. Here's the danger with that. People reciprocate how they're treated. And when we distrust others, they tend to distrust right back. And we could actually find ourselves contributing to the very thing that we fear and get into a vicious downward cycle of distrust and suspicion, creating more distrust and suspicion. Thankfully, it works the other direction too. See, trust is contagious, either direction. Trust and confidence can create more trust and confidence. Warren Buffett has done it. He creates it in his company. Richard Branson's done it. Many people have done it. They create trust and confidence, and it feeds upon itself. And people respond to it. They rise to the occasion. It brings out the best in them. It's the highest form of human motivation, to be trusted. And it inspires people. And they rise, and it becomes a virtuous upward cycle. So it can go either direction, either path. But around society, it tends to be going down. So we need leaders, we need entrepreneurs, we need artists, we need people that know how to counteract this, that know how to create trust in a world of declining trust, that create companies that are trusted in a world in which you don't know who you can trust. What an advantage to you as a business owner, as a leader in those type of settings, when you can create that. What an advantage. So this is an important question. Who do you trust? We ask it. We answer it every day. But, my friends, I'll give you an even more important question to ask and to answer. Is to put a mirror up to this one. Who do you trust? And ask this. Who trusts you? It's not just who do you trust, but who trusts you? Do your colleagues trust you? Does your team trust you? Do your partners trust you? Does your company trust you? Does your customers trust you? You might even extend it. Does your family trust you? Do you know the answer to this? Could you know? Should you know? Does it matter? I suggest it does matter. If it were just social, you might say, hey, it doesn't matter. Trust is low, but I can live with that. I'm arguing it's not just social, it's financial, and therefore it matters. Let me share with you a simple formula that will help you quantify the economics of trust. Trust always affects two measurable outcomes, always. Speed and cost. And here's how the formula works. When the trust goes down in a relationship or on a team, or in a company, in a culture, with a customer, when the trust goes down, the speed will go down with it. Everything will take you longer to do, and the cost will go up. Everything will cost you more to do because of the many steps you have to take to compensate for this lack of trust. Now, this is a tax, a low trust tax. Now, thankfully, the converse is true as well. When the trust goes up in a relationship, on a team, in a company, with a customer, when the trust goes up, the speed goes up with it. Everything can happen much, much faster while the cost comes down. Everything costs you less. This is a dividend, a high trust dividend. It is that real, that simple, and that predictable. So let me illustrate. First, on the negative side, when the trust goes down. Look at what happened after 9/11. After the terrorist attacks. Our trust or confidence in flying went down. So we took steps to compensate for that, and we beefed up the security, and it helped. But it came at a price. Takes you longer, costs you more. I used to be able to arrive at my home airport, this is pre-9/11, literally about 30 minutes before my flight. I could just cruise through security, get on the plane. Today, I have to arrive closer to 90 minutes before my flight. Because I can never predict how long it will take me to get through security. Now, I'm thankful for the security, but it comes at a price. It takes you longer, costs you more. I recently flew in and out of an airport in part of the world where the trust is very, very low for geopolitical reasons. Well, when I left that country to get out, I had to arrive at the airport literally 4 hours before my flight. My bag was then unpacked and repacked a couple of times, and I was interrogated a couple of times, and I was treated like everyone else was being treated, but the trust was so low, they had to take great steps to compensate for the lack of trust, for which I was thankful, but it came at a price. It takes you longer, costs you more. After we had the big scandals of Enron and WorldCom, Trust in public companies went down. Can't have that. U.S. Congress steps in, passed Sarbanes-Oxley. Sarbanes-Oxley is not trust. Rather, it's a series of rules and regulations because of the lack of trust. Now, it helped in many ways, but it came at a price. It takes a whole lot of time, costs a whole lot of money. That's always the consequence of low trust. Now, on the positive side, trust goes up, the speed goes up, cost goes down. Warren Buffett, highly trusted. He extends the trust to his colleagues as they're negotiating. Trust goes up, the speed goes up. They do the deal in a month instead of 6 months to a year. Cost goes down, no due diligence instead of spending millions on due diligence. And that's Buffett doing big deals. How about the most entrepreneurial example of all? Well, let me tell you about the donut guy. This is a street vendor. He sells donuts and coffee to passersby as they go into the office building in the morning. He's got a great location outside this huge office complex. Because of his location, he's got these long lines of customers that gather to be served. He notices that a lot of the customers, maybe half of them, are literally leaving the line because they don't want to wait any longer and going in straight to the building. He also notices that what's taken him the longest is making change for his customer. That's his bottleneck. So this street vendor decides that he's going to trust his customer. And here's what he does. He gets a little basket. In that basket, he puts dollar bills, $5 bills, $10 bills, nickels, quarters, and dimes. He puts the basket on the end of the cart. The customer comes through. He serves him donuts and coffee. The customer reaches out to pay him, and he motions to the customer, you make your own change. So the customer goes down to the end of the cart, and on their own, into the basket, they make their own change. Now, there's some risk in that, right? Because maybe they make the wrong change accidentally, or worse, purposefully. But when trust goes up, what goes up with it? Speed. That's exactly what happened. Instantly, this street vendor was able to put through twice as many customers as before. You see, he never lacked for customers. They would grow impatient and leave. Now he's eliminated his bottleneck. Twice as many customers as before. He's added no new cost in doing this. He's still a one-person show. And here's what he learned. Rather than people abusing the trust that he gave them, he found just the opposite. People liked being trusted. They came back to him more frequently. They were more loyal to him, and they gave him larger than normal tips. And he literally more than doubled his business by simply extending trust to his customer. Just a very simple illustration of the economics of trust, and it's always taking place. When you increase trust in any relationship, with any customer, on any team, you'll increase the speed and decrease the cost, and that is financial. You can quantify it. The economics are real. In fact, the data on this, again, is overwhelming. High trust is a dividend just as surely as low trust is a tax. Watson Wyatt study showed this. High trust organizations outperformed low trust organizations by 286%. That's nearly 3 times in total return to shareholders. A 3 times performance multiplier. You take a look at the 100 best companies to work for done by Fortune magazine in conjunction with the Great Places to Work Institute. To be on this list, you have to have high trust. It's 60% of the criteria. That's what defines a great place to work, is that there's mutual trust. These companies outperform the market by 416%, 4 times in a 7-year study. Between 3 and 4 times is what this multiplier is when there's trust. We see it in schools as well. Tony Brick of Stanford, his data shows this. High trust schools have a 3.5 times greater probability of increasing test scores than do low trust schools. You see it in every dimension and aspect of life. Robert Putnam's data shows that people who trust more, they live longer and they're healthier. It's a dividend in everything. This is financial. Now, I'm equally excited that it's also that it's social as well. See, the quantitative is the financial side. The qualitative, trust always affects energy and joy. And when the trust goes down, so does the energy and so does the joy. When the trust goes up, up goes the energy, up goes the joy. This is qualitative, this is quantitative. This is the right thing to do, this is the economic thing to do. It's the convergence of both. This is an idea whose time has come, the speed of trust. Nothing is as fast as the speed of trust. Nothing is as energizing as relationships of trust. Now, that brings us, I've hit these first 2 points, that trust is financial, not just social, and that trust is the currency of the new economy today because of how it makes everything else work and go and how it affects everything else. Now that brings us to the third, that trust is a learnable competency. And that brings us to this important question, the how-to question, which is how do we create a trust dividend instead of paying a tax? If we're getting taxed now, how can we reduce the tax? How could we eliminate it? Better yet, how could we convert the tax into a dividend? If you're already getting a dividend, if you're already trusted, how could you double the dividend? How could you triple it? How could you increase it by 10 times? So no matter where you're at, whether it's high trust, medium trust, low trust, how could you improve this? How can you get this performance multiplier working for you instead of destructive tax against you? And how could you multiply the multiplier? So let me go through a brief framework. I'm going to get into the tools now. And all I'm going to be able to do in our time together is give you the basic framework and outline. You can go far deeper in this if you're interested. But here's a framework. I'm going to use a metaphor of the ripple effect, where the drop of water comes down and then the waves go out, the ripples go out. There are two dimensions to trust, two sides of trust that are always present, that are vital. The first we understand intuitively, and that is character. We trust people who have character. People trust us for our character. Again, that makes intuitive sense. But there's a second side that's equally important, equally vital, that sometimes we don't think about. But that is competence. We also trust people who are competent, and people look to us and trust us because of our competence. It's really the combination of both character and competence that makes a person and makes a company trusted. If you have one but not the other, it'll be insufficient. Character trust alone is insufficient. Competence trust alone is insufficient. You need both. I learned this the hard way many times in working with people. You got to have both. Not enough that they're honest. They also have to be able to perform. If they can perform but they're dishonest, that doesn't work either. We all know people that maybe are in either camp, high character, low competence, or low character, high competence. You got to have both. The character is a constant, always needed. The competence also is a constant, but it's tied to the job to be done, because none of us are perfectly competent in everything. As an example, my wife recently had to have some surgery, medical surgery. Now, I love my wife, and my wife loves me back. But when it came time to do the surgery, she didn't ask me to do it. And why not? Because I'm not competent. I'm not a doctor. So she trusted me, but not to do surgery. You can see how the confidence is tied to the job to be done. When you have both character and competence, that gives you extraordinary power. Now, here's how this ripple effect works. The drop of water comes down and the waves go out. The first wave, where this begins, is with yourself, self-trust. And this really means answering two key questions. First, do I trust myself? Do I trust myself? And second, do I give to others a person they can trust? Do I give to others a leader they can trust, an artist they can trust, an entrepreneur they can trust? So do I trust myself, and do I give to others a person they can trust? You start with yourself always. Then the wave ripples out. The ripples move on. The second wave of trust is relationship trust. This is now building trust with other people. You can see why you start from the inside out, why you start with yourself, because you'll have a hard time sustaining trust with other people if at the end of the day you don't really trust yourself. You then move out further into the organization, the team, organizational trust. See, too often people kind of skip the first two steps and go right to this one. Why is trust low on the team? We've got to work inside out. But when you start with yourself and then relationships, you move into the organization naturally. It ripples out beautifully. From there, you move out into the marketplace, market trust. Now, market trust is your brand. And we're talking about brand, and you will be talking about brand all week long here. But think about it. Your brand is nothing more or less, in the last analysis, than trust in the marketplace, trust with the customer. It's trust monetized. And when you have a strong brand, you get this performance multiplier that affects everything else. People buy more, they refer more, you get the benefit of the doubt. Everything's improved. If the brand is weak, diluted, devalued, you pay the destructive tax because the trust is low. It's so clear as it relates to brands. In the same way it's so clear at this fourth wave level, market trust, it's equally impactful at the first three waves, self, relationship, and organizational. We're just not as good at measuring it until now. But it's equally impactful at every wave. We finally move out to the fifth wave, societal trust. This is about contribution, creating value. counteracting all the cynicism and suspicion that's out there with value creation. See, the fourth wave, the market trust, is about reputation. It's your brand. These are 5 waves of trust. You always diagnose most effectively from the outside, working in. But if you want to change, you want to develop, you want to transform, that's always done best from the inside, working out. Starting with yourself, then with your relationships, then with your team, then with your group, your unit, your company, then moving to the marketplace with external stakeholders. Then you watch the impact you'll have on society. It's an inside-out process. So what we can all control, every one of us, is really this first wave, the self-trust, and we can heavily influence the other 3, the other 4, especially the relationship trust. So I'm going to hit those and give you a brief bit of the framework for those. And more than anything, I want to give you a language so you can think about this and talk about it. A language so you can talk about it, a framework so you can think about it, and a process so you can actually work on this. Again, this is something that we kind of intuitively understand, but I want to give you words for it to be able to describe it, because that's how you can get good at this. As I do this, I'm going to go through what I call these the first wave, self-trust, which is all about this key principle, and that's credibility. Credibility comes from the Latin term credere, which means to believe. Credibility is the foundation on which all trust is built. In the long run, we'll never have more trust that we can sustain than we have credibility. This is the base. This is the foundation. Warren Buffett is able to build trust very fast because he's so credible. He comes in, he's already on third base. He's already almost there because he's so credible. So credibility precedes you. And it precedes your business as well. It enables you to build trust and build it fast. It is the foundation. Self-trust, the key principle, is credibility. I'm going to describe how this is built. And there are 4 cores or 4 dimensions of this credibility. I'll use one last metaphor here. That is of a tree. You have the root system and the trunk of the tree. That's the equivalent of character. Most of it's beneath the surface, some of it's above, but most is beneath. By itself is insufficient. A tree stump is good to sit on, but not good for other purposes. You also have the branches and the fruits of the tree, far more visible. That's the equivalent of competence. See, competence tends to be far more visible to most people. But if you have competence but no character, there's no roots. When the storm comes, that tree will blow over, even though you might get away with it for a while. What we're looking, of course, is this combination of character and competence. And there are 4 cores of credibility, 2 of which belong to character, 2 of which belong to competence. Now, as we go through this, these 4 cores, apply this to yourself as a leader, artist, entrepreneur. Apply it also to your company. Look at it in both dimensions. You and your company, in terms of how credible are you. Let's go through each of these 4 cores briefly. The base, the foundation, the first core of credibility is integrity. Integrity is referring to honesty and truthfulness. But more than that, it's congruence. I was talking to Tony's wife, Sage, and she said the great thing about Tony is he is what he appears to be in real life. He's the same. What you see on stage is also the same person you see off stage. He's congruent. That's the ultimate illustration of integrity, is congruence. And that you do what you say that you value. You walk the talk. When people have that, it builds enormous credibility. With that credibility, they build trust and build it very fast. It didn't have to take forever. The real test of integrity is when there's a cost or a consequence. You see, it's easy to have integrity when there's no cost or consequence. Let me give 2 brief illustrations. John Huntsman, Sr., was in Huntsman Chemical, self-made billionaire, was selling 40% of a division of his company to Great Lakes Chemical. And the CEO of that company was named Emerson Campen. John Huntsman, they went in, they negotiated, they shook hands on a deal, $50 million for that 40% stake. They shook hands. The ball was in the other party's court to turn around the documents and get everything done. They got distracted with a bunch of stuff that came up. Several months went by. The market conditions changed dramatically. More months went by. In all, 6.5 months went by. The deal was supposed to be done quickly. The other party had dropped the ball. They had, they had shaken hands on a deal, but it's been 6.5 months. In the meantime, the market's changed so dramatically. Here's what's happened. The prices of raw materials have gone way down. That's the biggest input into a chemical company. And now Huntsman's profits have soared. They're worth a whole lot more today. In fact, Huntsman's banker said, your company, that $50 million stake is now worth $250 million. So they talk. Emerson Campen calls Mr. Huntsman and said, I understand that everything's changed. We shook hands on a deal 6.5 months ago. The ball was in our court to turn this around fast. We didn't do it. We got distracted. I know your company's worth a whole lot more today. My banker's telling me it's worth $250 million. We shook hands on 50. So I'll meet you halfway at $150 million. John Huntsman said, Emerson, we shook hands and had a deal at $50 million, and that's what it will be. And Emerson Campen said, but Mr. Huntsman, that's no longer fair to you, and I'm willing to pay you more. And Huntsman said, you negotiate for your company, Emerson, and I'll negotiate for mine. We shook hands on $50 million. That's our deal. They did the deal at $50 million. Huntsman went on to write about this in a book called Winners Never Cheat. And then he said, yes, I could have had another 100 million, maybe even 200 million if I wanted. But I never had to look over my shoulder or wrestle with my conscience. My word was my bond, and not only did I know it, but everybody knew it. It became the foundation. This integrity, this credibility built trust and built it fast. Let's look at the next dimension, the next core of credibility. Intent. Intent is like the trunk of the tree. Part of it's beneath the surface, part of it's above. Intent is referring to your motive, to your agenda. The intent that best builds credibility and trust is when you care about those that you're working with, those that you're serving. The agenda that best builds trust is when you're seeking mutual benefit. Win-win. Yes, I want to win, but I want you to win too, just as much as I want to win. And I care about your interest. The behavior that best builds it is when you're acting in others' best interests. And they know that, they believe that, they sense that. When you as a leader can do those things, care about others, seek mutual benefit, act in others' best interest, you become credible to people, they trust you. If you don't, if they're wondering, what's his agenda? What's her agenda here? What are they trying to do? They don't really care about me. They're not looking for my win. They're only after themselves. If they see you as self-serving or only after your own win and interest, they will withhold the trust and you'll pay a tax and everything else. So check your motive, check your agenda, check it for you personally, check it for your company, for your team, for your group as you work externally in the marketplace. How are you perceived? Are you seen as seeking mutual benefit? Or are you seen as being self-serving and one-sided? What's your intent? What's your motive as a leader? Do the people know that you care about them? Or do they not believe that? That matters enormously. Integrity and intent, you can see how those flow heavily out of your character. We now move to the next two cores of credibility that flow out of your competence. The third is capabilities. Capabilities are referring to your talents, your skills, your expertise, your knowledge. And the key question here is, are you relevant? Are you current? Are you growing? Are you improving, getting better? Are you innovating? Because someone could be very capable yesterday and not capable tomorrow because they've allowed complacency to set in. They've allowed the world to change around them without changing fast enough. And so they were once capable, now they're no longer. It's happened to companies all the time. It can happen to a person. That's why you're into continuous improvement, strategic innovation, constantly improving, getting better. Personally, organizationally, companies recreate themselves, reinvent themselves. Apple, Nokia, many organizations that Tony and others and Chet have been talking about. They recreate themselves. Companies do it. People do it too. They recreate themselves, reinvent themselves. They stay current and relevant. I'll never forget a time when a CEO of a company was being questioned by his board because he was proposing this massive training initiative of what he felt was vital to stay current and relevant. And without this, that they were not current and relevant in the marketplace. And there's a lot of turnover at the time in the industry. And so a board member said, well, what if we spend all this time and money training everybody? And then they all leave. The CEO thought about it and said, it's a good point. But let me ask you this. What if we don't train them and they all stay? And his point was, we're not relevant. We're not current, and we've got to stay that way. So your model here is Tiger Woods. Look at Tiger Woods. 12 years ago, wins the Masters by 12 strokes, and then he changes his swing. Why? Wants to get better, wants to improve, wants to stay relevant. Then a few years later, he wins 4 majors in a row, the Tiger Slam, and changes his swing yet again. Why? Wants to improve, get better, be able to sustain it longer, and draw upon this level of performance more frequently. He's always improving, always getting better. He's keeping those capabilities current and relevant. Finally, the fourth core or dimension of credibility is results. It's like the fruit of the tree. See, capabilities are the branches that produce the fruits. Then there's the results. That's your performance, your past performance, your current performance, because people project upon you future performance based upon what they've seen. And when they see a track record of results, that gives them confidence that it will continue. The best predictor of future performance is current performance. It's not the only one, and it can be changed, but it's one that people default to. So you got to give them something. You got to give them a track record. Or in many cases, we have to create a track record. That's okay. We can do it. But this results matters. All 4 dimensions matter. Integrity, intent, capabilities, and results. If you lack any one of those 4, you will lose that credibility and therefore the trust with your stakeholders. I learned this the hard way. Let me illustrate. This happened when I first got in as the CEO of Covey Leadership Center. Here's the situation. I'm brand new on the job. Within 10 days, we're meeting with the bank. 10 days on the job. We are in violation of the covenants with the bank. Maybe some of you have empathy, been there. And the company had been growing. We had high growth, so we had a good value proposition for customers, but we did not have a good business model. We were not profitable. We had high growth with low margins, or even no margins. We had a lot of debt. We had no outside capital, no equity. Do the math on that. A lot of growth with no margin, no outside capital, and a lot of debt. We're going to grow right out of business. And we are in serious violation with the bank covenants. So 10 days in the job, the bank says, we're going to pull the line of credit. I said, we can't do that. Give us an opportunity here. Give me an opportunity. They said, okay. What they agreed to was they give us some time, but we had to sign personal guarantees. So we signed personal guarantees. That bought us some time. We then had to see what the bank needed to see was performance. They needed to see results. It wasn't enough that we had honesty, integrity. They liked it. It wasn't enough that we had good intent. It wasn't enough that on paper we had the right capabilities. They hadn't seen the results. And without the results, they didn't trust us. So we had to perform. And we improved our business model. We got out of hobbies. We went through a lot of the strategic processes that Tony and Chet are talking about to improve. But we also focused on building a culture of trust with all stakeholders, knowing that was economic, that was financial, not just social. And it happened and it worked. We dramatically improved the numbers. We went back to the bank and they said, we love it. We love the performance. We love the results. They removed the personal guarantees. Then we continued to perform, continued to get better. We actually ended up increasing our profits by 12 times. Went back to the bank. The bank said, we really love what you're doing. In fact, we love it so much, we want to double your line of credit, which is trust for the bank. The point is, it was the results that converted the cynic. It wasn't enough to talk about it. We had to do it. We had to perform. And when we did, the trust followed. Now, look at those. Integrity, intent, capabilities, results, all 4 are vital. All are needed. Apply this to yourself. Apply it to your company. Let me briefly mention this last key point, because I'm on the how-to now, that third big idea of that trust is a learnable competency. How do you learn it? Through credibility, those 4 cores of credibility. And the second way of how you learn it is the second wave, which is through behavior. It's your relationship trust, which is based on behavior. It's behavior. It's what we do and how we do it. So we can't just talk about it. You can't talk yourself out of a problem that you behaved yourself into. The only way out of that problem is to behave your way out of that problem. When you behave your way out, you can't get out. So our whole goal is to behave in ways that build trust, building on a foundation of credibility. When we do that, we have a great starting point. Here's the objective. With everyone, we have the equivalent of what we might call a trust account, like a financial bank account. It signifies the amount of trust in a given relationship. And like a financial bank account, how do we build it? We make deposits. How do we destroy it? We take withdrawals. What are deposits and withdrawals? Deposits are behaviors that increase the trust. Withdrawals, behaviors that decrease it, that destroy it, that take it away. We've got to learn how to behave in ways that build trust and avoid the withdrawals. Here's a withdrawal for penguins. He just keeps doing that. You see, sometimes the fastest way to build trust is just to quit taking withdrawals. The point is this: not all behaviors are created equal. Some matter more than others. It was Warren Buffett who put it this way: it takes 20 years to build a reputation and 5 minutes to ruin it. If you think about that, you'll do things differently. See, some behaviors will destroy it. Some will build it fast. We have, in the Speed of Trust book and the like, gone in depth on these behaviors. I'm not going to go through these now, but there's 13 behaviors that are common to high trust people, high trust leaders, high trust companies. These are things that they do and how they do them. You do these things, you do them well, you'll increase the trust. You avoid these things, or you do the opposite of them, or the counterfeit, you'll destroy it. Let me give you just a couple of illustrations. One of the behaviors that builds trust is to talk straight. Talk straight. That means you're open, honest, real candid. The opposite of that is when you talk crooked, which is called lying. It's pretty obvious, right? See, the behavior and the opposite are obvious. They're common sense. But what is common sense is not always common practice. In fact, it's usually not. The real danger to some of these behaviors is what I call the counterfeit behavior. And the counterfeit behavior to talking straight is when people spin. It's when they twist, when they manipulate, when they posture. It's when they technically tell the truth, but they leave the wrong impression. That happens, people don't trust. Creating transparency is another behavior that builds trust. Transparency means openness, light, I can see through. The opposite of that, I obscure, I cover. The counterfeit is when people operate with hidden agendas. That obscures the trust. Another behavior that builds it, I just mentioned a few of these. The 10th one, to practice accountability. That means you hold yourself accountable first, then you can hold others accountable second. You start with yourself, you take responsibility. So the opposite of this, you say, hey, not my fault, don't look at me. The counterfeit is you say, it's his fault, it's her fault, it's their fault. You point the finger and blame. Finally, to keep commitments. This is the fastest way to build trust, is to make someone a commitment and keep it. Make them another commitment, keep it. Repeat commitments. You do that well, you can build trust, build it fast. Anyway, there's 13 of these behaviors. If you're interested, at speedoftrust.com, you can get a list of that, plus also some free complimentary tools that will help you assess your credibility that you could also apply to your company, and you can understand this. The point is this, that we have to behave our way into this. You build trust through credibility, you build it through behavior, and we can do something about both of those. We can influence that, we can control it. And as we do that, we will grow trust and we'll grow it fast. Let me conclude with this brief story that illustrates how trust is built, how it can be lost, and how it can be restored. Because many times what's needed is to restore trust. This happened a couple of years ago with my son when he turned 16. And what happens when you turn 16? That's right, you can drive. And he was excited to drive. My wife and I, his mother, were excited for him to drive because we were tired of being a taxi service for him. So we said, son, we're thrilled to let you drive, but you need to know something. Driving is a privilege, not a right. So let's go over some rules. We went through some rules. Go the speed limit. Be safe. Wear your seatbelt. Obey the laws. You got it, son? Yeah, got it, Dad. Got it, Mom. Are you clear on the rules? Because if you violate these rules, you'll lose the privilege to drive. Don't worry, he said. All right. Well, everything was great for the first month. Then about a month into it, I'll never forget, it was a Friday night, midnight. The telephone rings. My wife, his mother, answers the phone, and I hear her say these words. Well, I'll let you talk to his father, officer. And she hands the phone to me, and sure enough, it's the police. My son has been pulled over for speeding, excessive speeding, as in going 83 miles an hour in a 25 mile an hour zone. Now, there was no alcohol, no drugs, anything like that involved. He's a good kid, he just had bad judgment, teenage judgment. He later said, well, Dad, I was just trying to get home for curfew and I had to go really fast. Then even later, he quite cleverly said, Dad, I was just trying to show you what the speed of trust really was. Well, that was clever, but not good enough. So we played this thing out, went to court. The judge fined him $555. We made him pay the fine. He had a summer job, took almost all of his savings. But then what happened next was even harder. The judge did not suspend his license. Did not. But guess who did? That's right, we did, his parents. And why did we? Because we wanted him to trust us. And we felt like if we didn't suspend his license, he wouldn't trust us. And neither would his brothers and sister. Well, that was hard on him, and it was hard on us. But after a while, he came back and said, Dad, I'm ready to drive again. I said, are you clear on the rules? Dad, I've never been more clear about anything in my life, he said. And I said, great, we trust you to drive again. Here's the happy ending. It's been 5 years. He's been a model driver ever since. How do we know? We observe, we see, but we also hear from his friends and from his friends' parents. When they're going somewhere and their parents ask, where are you going? They might say, don't worry, Dad, or don't worry, Mom. We're going with Covey. And that means we're going the speed limit, we're wearing seatbelts. Believe me, it is no fun at all. But he has earned that reputation. You see, he has behaved himself out of the problem he behaved himself into. And the trust is not only back to where it was, it is higher than it ever was. You can restore trust, and you do it through credibility and through behavior. My friends, nothing is as fast as the speed of trust. Nothing is as profitable as the economics of trust. Nothing is as central to leadership as relationships of trust. It's truly the one thing that changes everything. And in the words of Albert Schweitzer, he said, in everyone's life, at some time, our inner fire goes out. It is then burst into flame by an encounter with another human being. We should all be thankful for those people who rekindle the inner spirit. When we extend trust to another person, we rekindle the inner spirit, both theirs and ours, and we can produce an extraordinary dividend, the speed of trust. I thank you so much, my friends. It's been wonderful to be with you. Thank you very much.